good morning to all of you. मैं हूँ आपके साथ शिल्पा भावना and I welcome you all to this virtual conference on the platform of ASSOCHAM India where we are exploring the horizons for Work Vision 2021. And we are talking about HR in the new normal and beyond. My dear friends, yesterday also we had this conference and we had very good responses from your side and we discussed a lot about the HR in this like during the pandemic and the post-pandemic thing. So how HR is going to evolve. Because, when we talk about the HR, people say that it is something that has to be managed with the conversations rather than just with policies. But post-pandemic, those conversations are just on the mutual platforms. So how to take it further? What is the vision beyond? We are talking about that in this Work Vision 2021. Yesterday also we discussed about a lot of technologies that can be like used for HR. We also talked about the evolution of the workforce in this HR field. So today what we are going to do in this particular session, we are going to learn the art of scaling up. Friends, when companies grow up, I think the structure of the companies that becomes a little more complex. So how we can take it up further, how we can use it to drive our businesses. This is what we all are going to discuss in this session. And in this session, we have got a few questions that will be answered, like how to define scaling up and what are the challenges in India, which metrics need to be tracked at various stages of organizational growth. Also, we are going to talk about how do we balance immediate shareholder returns and long-term growth. This is going to be really important. And then what does it mean from a talent standpoint? So I hope all these points that we have been talking about, these questions are going to be answered in this session. And to have all those answers, we have this eminent galaxy of the panelists over here with us. I would like to introduce them one by one, and at the end, I would introduce you to the moderator who is going to take out all these answers from our panelists. So, my dear friends, let me just introduce you to the panelists first. We have with us full-time director and chief human resources officer, Pernod Ricard, Mr. Shrikant Lodikar. Welcome, sir. We also have with us Global Chief Human Resources Officer, Strides Pharma, Ms. Tanya Mishra. She's a doctor, so I should say Dr. Tanya Mishra. Welcome, ma'am. Also, we have with us Chief Human Resources Officer, MNext Info Technologies, Dr. Amit Pandey. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
We also have with us Chief Human Resources Officer, Tata Chemicals, Mr. R. Nanda. Nanda, sir, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning to all of you and nice to be here. Thank you.
And my dear friends, now I would like to introduce you to the moderator because she is the one who is going to just have a round with the mics. She is the Professor Communication Area for School of Management, Professor Sriparna Basu. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
And ma'am, before I hand over the mic to you virtually, I would like to give a brief introduction of yours to our audience. So my dear friends, Professor Sriparna Basu, she's a professor of communication at Ford School of Management, as I told you. She holds an MA from Jadhav University, Kolkata, and she's a gold medalist. So I'm afraid of the gold medalist, so I'm out of the conversation. And she has obtained her master's and PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA. That's really interesting, ma'am. Cultural is something that interests everyone. And I would also like to tell my participants that she has more than 20 years of teaching experience, which also includes training and consulting experience across various industry sectors. So my dear friends, if I'm going to read about her, all the achievements, I think the whole session take up. So now it's the time that I should hand over the mic to her virtually again so that she can take up this session further. Ma'am, Professor Sriparna Basu, to you.
Thank you, Shilpa. Thank you for this very kind introduction, and I do hope I live up to it. I hope I am visible and audible in equal measure. I will be making some opening comments, and I'll keep it brief because I'm as eager as you to listen to the eminent panelists to get the wisdom, their particular wisdom in the big question we are asking today, the art of scaling up. And it's interesting. We are not calling it the science of scaling up. So I was thinking that the art, I think the whole aspect of art invokes the design one has, right? So probably we should talk more about how we design things and why do we need to design them that way. So the art kind of threw up that kind of a connotation to me, which we should explore. I have a few opening comments or questions which I will lay before this panel, eminent panel. And I do urge all participants to put attending the session, to put their questions in the chat session. It will help our panelists look at the questions so that when we come to the Q&A, they can choose these questions. We can choose some of the questions and they can respond. As I was thinking yesterday between sessions and a bunch of other things a professor does, certain things came to my mind. When we look at upscaling, what do we mean exactly? To me, we thought that we are poised at a moment when we need to break ground with a lot of new solutions. And of course, the idea of technology, rapid solutions to come in. But that said, these solutions also have to be sustainable and resource efficient. Now, as a growing country, as an emergent economy, resource efficiency has meaning for the whole world, but it has deeper meanings for us. So how to do this in a resource efficient manner so that we don't get really caught up in the art of jugaad, but rather we kind of play to have a more win-win approach. We have more sustainable long-term solutions. The second thing that occurred to me was that when we talk about this growth journey, we are really talking about a broad sector alliance. We're talking about taking in a lot of alliance partners, public, private, social organizations. So without this kind of putting into place partnerships in this sense, can we scale up? So that was another thing. And how do we do that? The growth projections put by IMF, if I'm not wrong, and please correct me, is 9% per year growth trajectory. Now, it's amazing if we can achieve this for the next 10 years. How would we do that? The third thing that occurred to me is very much related to our health sector issues, what we are all going through, the reason why we are meeting across this virtual platform, the pandemic, and the requirement for R&D. We have done very well, but what are the kinds of investments the private sectors are looking at? What is the kind of R&D imagination? Are they putting, what kind of R&D is getting to be part of the DNA of organizations? They all have their core values, but are we going to rework the DNA? So this is also, is it possible? This is also something that I would like to know from the eminent panelists, that vis-a-vis the kind of spend we have, the percentage of GDP spend we have in R&D, what extent do we need to improve that? The fourth point which occurred to me was, all this is very well, and I will take an example that all of us are using new innovations, all of us are using a lot of technology without really knowing the full features of the technology. So whether call it the virtual platforms or intelligent devices, do the customers know about the entire, are they informed? Do we have informed, information is also empowerment. Do I know what is there for me, what journey I'm going through or will go through in times to come? So I think in order for organizations to become take a more stronger, play a larger role, they will need a lot of informed, empowered audience. The sixth point I wanted to talk about is we already have a lot of resources, so much talent, so much the kind of infra even that we have. Have we used it to put it to optimal usage? Is it time that we talked about resource efficiency in the light of how light we can go on assets, so-called assets? So what is, how are we have a lot of traditional reserves. How can we use them to our advantage? And the last point that I will make is, once again, focusing on sustainability. In order to do that, I think accountability of organizations, accountability of social accountability should also rise. In terms of, if we focus on accountability, sustainability will follow. Whereas if we do not focus on accountability, I think rapid growth is only going to be a short-term affair, or perhaps not that affair even. So with these kind of opening comments, and these are more questions than comments. I wouldn't call them questions. I'm taking the opportunity to generate my own questions, and I learn a lot through the session. The first question that we wanted to tackle is how to define the art of scaling up. And Mr. Lonikar, who is the full-time director and chief human resources officer of Pernod Ricard, I would invite you to please take up this question. We all are eager to learn from you. Mr. Lonikar.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Spadine. I'm not here to teach anything, but I'll definitely be happy to share my thoughts about this very important topic. Very grateful to ASSOCHAM for inviting me, and very happy to be a part of this eminent panel. To me, scaling up is actually the roadmap to actualize your planned short-term missions milestones. Okay, and that should be in line with the corporate long-term vision of an organization. So while you were giving these examples, for example, for me, it's like, leveraging India's huge market potential to grow revenues by 5x, in line with the vision of being the premium brands market leader in all global markets. This could be a scaling up definition for an ambitious business. For me, scaling up is not about survival in long term. There are many companies which claim they are surviving for 100 years, 50 years, 75 years, 150 years and all. It's not about surviving. It is not even about incremental growth, which is at par with the segment growth. Like the market is growing at 5% and my business is also growing at 5%. You're riding on that wave. Actually, it doesn't talk about the strength of your organization. Scaling up is all about being outlandish and audacious. It should be about growing the business, that is the top line, bottom line, and all other parameters that we all know. It is about growing the organization and strengthening it that will support the future growth of the business. It is about expanding the consumer base or even creating new markets for your products or competition. It is definitely, being a HR person, I strongly believe it is about growth of employees that comes with the growth of the business. And of course, growing returns to the investors, which should be surpassing the expectations that they have defined. So that is how I would define what scaling up means. But this is, to me, fundamentally the organizational leadership agenda. So everybody is in the business, everybody has the products, everybody has the available consumer there. What differentiates is the organization backing that business and organization led by right leadership there. So this is a leadership agenda to me, and that I believe there are 4 components to this. Okay, first, the leadership which is leading that organization and business, they should believe in the idea that there is no such thing as a mature business, and this is where most of the businesses fail. That we have already reached a point, and now from here on, if the growth drops to little bit of incremental level, it is okay because we have matured business. Our age is 25 years, 30 years of business kind of. And these are the leaders who, irrespective of economy, whether it is slow or fast, whether the growth in the field where you are, it is slow or fast, whether the competition is stiff or it is much lower, they continuously believe that there is nothing called as a mature business. That means every business is a growth business if the leader believes it happens. Second and important point here, that these leaders ensure that growth is profitable, like you said, Dr. Suparna, sustainable and capital efficient. And third point is, it is scaling up is in the corporate mindset that is created by the leaders. So this has to be about how you think and how your perspectives are. And the last point is again relevant to this, that it must start, the mindset must start at the top and it must reach all the way to the bottom of the organization. That means everybody is thinking about that. And to do all these things, the focus is required on building organizational capabilities, competencies, being agile to assimilate and grow into new challenging roles in the organization, morale, ownership of stretched goals in the organization, especially by the leaders and process champions. A very important aspect here is about adherence to the ethical governance and any damaging shortcuts being used by people to be avoided there. We can scale, actually leverage on the expertise of the consultants and their newer styles of thinking and working with, because they keep researching and studying, embracing high technology for higher gains in the organization, investing, the courage to invest in new brands, markets, external, internal, that will energize the workforce. It has to be always dynamic. It cannot be the same thing that is happening there. So if in summation, what I would say is that scaling up is something, a game of excellence, and it is a challenge that the organization and leaders must take up proactively, not as a response or reaction to the demands of the market or competition. Proactively done, I can tell you it's fun also, and chances of success are greater there also. Thank you.
Before you pass it around, I personally feel that scaling up is about what stage the organization is at. For some organization, if you are, you're on a growth strategy, and then obviously scaling up makes sense. However, for some, if you are not on the growth trajectory and your growth is kind of less, then obviously you're not scaling up. Also, it is about the talent and what is the diversity of talent that you're looking at. Are you looking at multi-skilling? Are you looking at reskilling? Or are you looking at a new dimension altogether? Also, if you are a startup where you're looking for funds, you want to scale up. So there are different dimensions. So I don't think one size fits all. I'm sorry, I just got it in.
You're on mute, ma'am.
Of course. There are all kinds of emerging organizations, startups are massively linking up their value chains with big organizations. So that is happening. I think Mr. Loninger's speech has encompassed a bigger leadership agenda, that it is scaling up is a game of excellence. It doesn't matter what is the size of the organization. And another thing I take away, that there is no such thing as a natural business. I didn't think that. There's no such thing as a natural business. This is something, this is a big takeaway from me, that no matter in which, and Dr. Mishra, you've added to it, growth trajectory, but I think we can what is the larger purpose of every organization entering into the market is to enter a game of excellence. Otherwise, why enter it at all? And proactively done, as I said, it can be fun. But reactively done, I think the pain increases, decision dilemmas increase. So, which brings us to the second question, really. Where are we in India? What are the challenges in India? And I would like Dr. Pandey first to speak on this, and then Mr. Nanda. So, Dr. Pandey, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Basu. Firstly, thank you, Ashacham, and all the panelists here. It is already a very interesting discussion in first 20 minutes. So I hope it's going to the next level now. See, if you look at challenges in India, first let's think about the macroeconomic challenges, right? Why has Silicon Valley been so successful? Or why have European startups, American startups have become so big? You can see an Amazon growing in last 2 decades. You can see an Apple becoming so big in last 4 decades. These companies have really scaled up. Why is it so? First is acceptance of risk capital. Now in India, if you look at it, a large part of growth is funded by banks, which means you are leveraging your assets, you are leveraging your organization to generate funds for growth. Whereas in US as well as Europe, risk capital is highly acceptable. A lot of Indian organizations are very risk averse. They are not willing to get in equity partners, be in fund of, be in different formats. It can be either private equity investors, venture capitalists. It can be raising funds from equity markets. A lot of promoters, entrepreneurs think, why should I give away a percentage of my shareholding because it's going to take away control from me? That risk avoidance at our end makes it difficult to accept risk capital. That's one. Secondly, if you look at studies on national cultures, Greet Hofstede in his 1991 study, where he looked at multiple factors, and I'm sure Dr. Basu, you would have read a lot about it, seen a lot about it. He rates India at a score of 40 out of 100 on the scale of uncertainty avoidance, which means we Indians, by our nature, avoid ambiguity, we avoid risk. We may not be willing to take risks. Now, scaling up comes with a lot of risks. It requires you to walk into ambiguity in an uncharted area. You are not sure of returns. You are not assured of anything when you scale up. You may have brilliant processes, you may have brilliant set of people, but it is still uncertainty. So a lot of us are not willing to take risks. Plus, as a society, we are not rewarding risk. So, do we have an ecosystem that will accept failed entrepreneurs happily? Are we willing to celebrate failures? That's the second question over there. Third is lack of ecosystem. So, when you scale up, you need access to funds, you need access to talent, you need access to an entire ecosystem which will have vendors, which will have infra. I think other than Bangalore, I think Mumbai is coming up, Pune, Gurgaon to some extent have come up, but we lack those ecosystems that will help organizations scale up. So these three challenges I see at a national level, they are stopping us from scaling up at a mass level like a US or a Europe. So these are some of the starters from my side. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, and thanks for bringing in Hofstede. But interestingly, cultures are not static either. India has
They're
a
not.
very young population, and if you look at digital culture, it is moving very differently from kind of Hofstedian values which have been etched out. But absolutely point taken, risk aversion. No matter what, culture doesn't move at such a fast pace. We do have risk aversion and a huge long-term orientation. How do we deal with that? So I will now invite Mr. Nanda to sort of give us his insights. This very important question. The challenges for anyone.
Thank you, Professor Basu, and good morning to everyone here. Nice to meet all of you, at least virtually in these times. Just to add to the context of our conversation, I think this growing up, I think, means different things for different organizations and for different industries, depending on where they are in their own growth. Yeah, so I was saying that growing up or challenges of scaling up means different things for different organizations and industries, depending on what scale they are in their own lifespan as an enterprise. I think for a company that is just setting out to be an entrant in the industry, I think even just getting the first customer order is a challenge, and that's something which the companies really look forward to. And for companies which are trying to unsettle or seat, somebody who's a very well entrenched player in the industry, I mean, they face a lot of challenges even just gaining entry into the customer's door, because no customer wants to deal with somebody who's just coming in who has no credibility behind. And for companies that are already large, I think they have different types of challenges in terms of how they would like to take it forward. And some of it would be purely internal to the organization. Some of it may be fueled by external competitive forces. But the way coming back to the question that we discussed about what are the challenges we see in especially in the Indian context, I think there are multiple types of challenges that organizations face. I think the first and foremost is really sometimes there is challenges which may be caused due to political reasons, sometimes social or community reasons, and sometimes ecological reasons. In many cases, at least our experience has been that not all of them are sometimes well-founded. Some of them are challenges that are created due to vested interest, which needs to be managed. And so it's not necessarily a cakewalk that you can just get in and do things that you want, because you need to factor in as to how you will be viewed by this, the entire ecosystem with whom you have to deal with. The other point which we also, I think, have been increasingly seeing is what I would describe as the activism by vested interest groups. Some of it may be acting as a front for sometimes competition, or maybe for sometimes other players in the industry who may want to not allow you to have easy entry into the particular industry where you are in. I think sustainability and environmental issues are definitely becoming far more important in the current scheme of things. And I think all organizations are going to increasingly face the scrutiny. And I think there's going to be scrutiny from both angles. One is going to be from the regulators or the people who frame policies, going to be one side. And I think the second thing is really going to be also a lot of pressure brought in by customers, who are probably going to only wanting to deal with companies that probably are far more better tuned to dealing with these sustainability and environmental issues, rather than leaving it in a stage which is far more detrimental for their own long-term interest. So the way I look at it, the challenges are multiple. There are some challenges which are beyond the organization. Either created by the authorities or the regulators or thing. There are some things which are created by the industry competition in which you operate. And the other challenges are in terms of the ecosystem in which you operate, depending on where you are located. Apart from all of this, I think is the most important one is the internal organizational challenges, where sometimes the challenges could be in terms of not getting the right talent that you need because you are located at a disadvantageous location, where attracting right talent becomes a big issue. Or it may be that you're in an ecosystem where there is leadership transition happening, or there are management challenges happening, which is also a cause for lack of stability in those organizations or lack of ability to retain people. So all of these could be purely internal. So there is no one size fits all approach that we can probably take. I would only say that every organization, irrespective of whether they are big, small, medium, or very, just as a startup, all of them will face very different challenges at at some point of time, and at every time they will have a new set of challenges they'll have to deal with. But I think what really would make a difference between a successful organization and that organization that's not so successful is really, does the organization have the capability to straddle all these types of different challenges with an equal positive mindset to make sure that they are addressed? They don't have quick fixes applied, but they really look at it in terms of what will help them in the long run to make it more sustainable. I think if that is the approach that they take, I think organizations can succeed. It's not impossible for them to do it. And we have enough examples where in every industry, there has always been some organization that has really led the pack because they looked at issues differently and they went behind it with I would say, absolutely undevoted attention to that whole thing. So that's really what I thought I would share at this point of time. Thank you.
So for the second round, have this for the attention of all panelists. Certainly, Mr. Nanda. I read some research. It was done a decade back, and it took a lot of participant managers from different contexts like Australia, US, Japan, and India. And regardless of the geography, it was found that the managers who were practical, the managers who were adaptable, managers who wanted change were more successful in their career path, and therefore I am presuming in the organization than those who favored status quo and the existing administrative heritage that they have got. Now, this is an established research by England and Lee. And I just want to keep it in our mind as we make our segue to the next set of questions, which I was hoping Mr. Lonikar and Dr. Pandey will take up. Which are the metrics which we are going to use at various stages of organizational growth? And we have the perfect segue to that at this point. What kind of metrics are we using for organization? What does it mean? And we are moving towards the talent issue gradually.
Yeah, you're right. The financial parameters, of course, are very, very critical because that's where the business is measured on. So the profits, market share, IRR, ROI, all these things are very important. Also, it's important to know which needs of the consumers you are meeting, existing needs, or you are meeting the new needs, creating new needs and new markets and all that. So this is in the external world. That is important, but internally for the organization, how are you growing and how are you supporting the growth here? My sense is that there are a few parameters. One is the performance achievement, that is how teams are performing, individuals are performing against the budgets or plans, and that has to happen. Classically we call it as a PMS. In every company it is available there. So how efficiently that is being measured, because every drop makes the ocean. So is there an ability in the organization to measure contributions and value additions of every element, every talent of the organization? We do this classical employee engagement surveys, that tells us the health and what are the people pain points in the organization. So those reports are very, very important reports. What normally we do is that we just look at the number, what is the score on a scale of whatever, 10, 100 or whatever, and then we feel happy, unhappy, and we draw some plans and move on. But actually, these are great measurements that should be used to check the strength of the organization and are we really going into the growth field in the future. The best thing that we have all learned in the last few decades is to benchmark with your competition. And today, because we are boundaryless, it is not only in India, but it has to be a global measurement, and that has to be the ambition. That whoever is the best globally, how far we are from there, and how do we reach there? What is the gap, and what kind of actions we need to take? That becomes a classical point of measurement for organization. Then some of the things that are very important for sustainability are like process compliance, the governance model that is in place. How sensitive the organization is to the process compliances. How do they balance the focus on systems versus people factor in the organization? Then, as you are a growing organization, there is a change all around. It would be transforming the whole equation of the business, market, and organization. So, what is the kind of operating model you have, and what is the organizational design you have that is supporting the business? And how agile it is? Can it change the shape, size? And can it change at a speed? That becomes a very important parameter. And many organizations fail on this parameter and miss on the growth because they are so rigid about their structures and ways of working that have happened. There are stories of many companies, I don't want to name, but those companies said our way of doing things is like this, and that is our culture and that is our identity. Now, everything in your market and competition had changed, but your way of doing things has not changed. You will be out of the market. So this agility is very important in the model and design of the organization. And one of the things, again, this may sound a little weird, but are these businesses and organizations encouraging competition to enter your market? Is it making the market lucrative? Today, it's impossible for anybody to be in a monopolistic kind of ambition in the market. So there will be many players there. And the fun is in that when you have so many competent players, you are still a winner and you are excellent about it. So do you encourage the competition to come to your market and play the game there, And one of the most important things I think the organization has to build as a capability to project the future, assess where the market is heading, what are the needs of the customers, consumers, and what kind of products or processes or deliverables that we need to provide them. And this is the classical one that we have to do it before others do that. So that capability is core to organization, which actually is ambitious about growth. That's what I think. So.
Thank you, Mr. Lonikar. Once again, some of the very important things that you have pointed out. So, are you making the market great? Is the organization design conducive to growth, or the rest of the world have changed and you are set on not changing that, set on not changing yourself? These are not only these are the great internal questions. What is the level of the internal conversation within an organization, and how does it relate to the ROI, your market share? Ultimately, I think these things get linked. I invite Dr. Pandey now. Dr. Pandey, what's your take?
Thank you, Dr. Basu. I would want to deep dive on some of these metrics. So, having worked with multiple set of promoters who were at the cusp of scaling up or were in process of scaling up, some of these metrics become really, really important for survival as well as for scale up of the organization. Now, a lot of organizations get confused between profitability versus cash. Profitability is very important when you're looking at scaling up, especially when you're small up to let's say $50 million or $100 million. Your ability to generate cash on day-to-day, month-on-month basis becomes extremely important. Unless you generate enough cash, you will not be able to fund your growth. To grow, you need to invest in people, you need to invest in infra, invest in processes, digitizing things, and none of this is going to happen unless you are generating enough cash. So if I look at organization growth from a startup level, let's say from zero to first $1 million or $2 million, the focus has to be on generating revenue. That's the time when you try to prove to the world that my product or my service or my offering really, really works. From 2 million to about 25 million, you focus on generating cash because you need a lot more of it to fund growth. Post 25 million or $50 million, you need to build an amazing ability to accurately predict your profitability and your revenues, because a few percentage points here or there would actually mean millions of dollars. So unless you build that internal ability to do that, it becomes really, really difficult to scale up. So the financial metrics that companies should definitely look at is return on capital employed if you're not very asset heavy, or return on net assets if you're very asset heavy in that case, because every dollar that you're investing in your business has an opportunity cost. Now, I have seen a lot of companies face this challenge that let's say you have 100 rupees of revenue and you have profit margins of about 35 rupees. And to generate 100 rupees of revenue, you need to invest 45 rupees in the business, your working capital, to generate that 100 rupees, which means for every 100 rupee of revenue generated, you are going back in terms of cash by rupees 10. And as it happens in multiples, in millions, in crores, in $1 billion, you are going back on your need for cash. And then you are dependent on external market to fund you. So that becomes an extremely critical matrix, especially when you are growing up at that stage. Second is matrix in terms of your customers, your cost of customer acquisition, your lifetime value of a customer. Now, a lot of product companies face that challenge because cost of customer acquisition may be high. Customer retention is low because there is very high competition. And your lifetime value of customer needs to be much higher than your cost of customer acquisition. If that is not happening, maybe you're in wrong business or your product is not working at all. Finally, your net promoter score when it comes to customers is extremely important, because unless you're getting referred by your customers, you're not generating more business. If I look at people, we need to replicate same metrics over there as well. So what is the cost of my employee acquisition? What is lifetime value created by my employee over these years? What is my ability to retain my own employees? and what is my net promoter score when it comes to employees. So a lot of times we treat our customers extremely nicely, but our employees become second priority. But I think we need to keep them at par, and we need to measure these metrics at a very regular intervals. Secondly, I believe that in terms of processes, digitization has become extremely critical for survival of all organizations. Now, if you look at it in terms of digitization, what is the right measure? I think for us, what really works is what percentage of your processes in the organizations are digitized today. It's a matrix that you will not find anywhere else, but I think it's very critical because each manual process also takes hours per process. And if you're able to automate this, you can actually generate a lot of efficiency in the system, which is there. Further, like Shrikant has said, there is a lot of operating productivity that you need to track. So how productive are your different teams, your operations team, your sales team? What is the kind of revenue that you are generating per person becomes another important matrix. In terms of people, I'll also want to ask, when organizations try to grow, a lot of times they forget that the ability of their existing leaders to manage a new talent pool or a larger organization is very limited. So what is your average managerial span in the organization becomes very critical. If your managers cannot handle more than 300 people and you end up hiring 5,000 people, then you are obviously not going to survive in the long run. So are you building your internal capability? One question that really helps is, are you going to hire same set of managers again, or are you willing to hire same set of leaders again at each stage of growth? And if your answer is no, then you need to relook at how you are hiring people. Because if you plan to build a $500 million business and your leadership is able to handle $50 million, then you would need to rethink about how you're hiring people. So these
Okay,
were
so,
some of the
so
metrics.
you are pointing out a very critical balancing act. Of course, you are saying that at a certain point, if you don't even get revenue, I mean, there's no talking of the future.
True.
But after that, you have to advance the focus, and the shifting of focus is interestingly retuning the system over and over, and even finding a better efficiencies. Of course, we are working in a digital ecosystem without even understanding it. That's one thing. And it leads me to sort of, we have talked about cultural quotient, emotional quotient, but do we talk about DQ or digital quotient as well? I think the last two questions are going to be critical here. Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for this immensely important comments like the internal capability. How are you setting the stage in terms of internal capability? Who do you want? Why do you want them? What kind of jobs do you want? Or is it you are orienting your jobs by looking at people? So these are extremely important questions. For the fourth question, how do we balance, again, shareholder returns? Here we talked about starting with revenues. Get your million, then focus on, shift your focus. How do we balance immediate shareholder returns and long-term growth? It seems like we have to shift the focus. We have to shift the goalpost over and over again, Mr. Lonikar.
Well, I'm sorry if I have a very different perspective on measuring metrics.
Go ahead, Dr. Mishra. We'll first listen to you. Yeah.
First, I think we are living in a world of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and digitization. I think it's very essential to understand that at every touch point, you have to introduce technology, whether it's a customer touch point, whether it's your people touch point, in fact, all stakeholder touch points. Having said that, it's important to understand that at the base, you need to have big data, which is actually analyzing all of your matrices and understanding the trends. Because if you do not understand the trends, there's no way that you're going to measure any kind of metrics, however good your process will be. So therefore, it needs to have a dashboard, maybe Tableau, to be able to look at the year on year. And this is something which is across, whether you're measuring your quality, whether you're measuring your productivity, whether you're measuring your sales, whether it's a simple POS machine on your retail floor. But at every distinct level, you just have to use technology. And without technology, I think every organization is going to become a dinosaur. And that's my limited point that I would like to make, yes.
Thanks for bringing in big data. Are we even, that seems to be a kind of a submarine of all thoughts. It's so latent that we don't invoke it even because it's so there. Yes, people touch point, communication touch point, customer touch point. We have big data indicating traits, and that's a very critical reference point. So with this also additional input of about the digital ecosystem, Mr. Lonikar, would you throw some light on how do we balance, therefore, shareholder returns, which are very immediate concerns of organizations, with long-term growth?
Yeah. See, fundamentally, if we look at it from point, what actually shareholders look at, what matters to them. What matters to them is what are the ideas, business ideas, about the products and services and how business succeeds in creating values. You have to convince them. Second, when you talk about values created, it cannot be abstract. It has to be black and white, very well defined. Third, when they give you the investment as an organization, as a leader, that the responsibility is given, they look at motivated leaders, who are intelligent risk takers, who are proactive, and they are aiming at excellence. They always want to be the best in whatever they do. And they always look for the leaders bringing that kind of an edge to the business and making tough decisions, tough yes and no type of decisions, not when all the data is available, but based on limited and imperfect data. Can our leadership and organization make the decisions? If that is available, all these ideas, values, energies, all these things are available, the confidence of shareholders is greater. And then it is much easier to convince them about long-term investments by foregoing short-term gains that they may be looking at. But depending on the position of products and business on the products and business life cycle stage that was referred by earlier, Tanya, the ongoing and present day business challenges like costs. Okay, it's a big challenge. So I'm investing, but I call it cost, not as an investment. And that mindset can be a very challenging thing. So how do I convince the shareholder that these costs are real investment, like employee cost? And I don't see employee cost as a cost in the business, but will my shareholder look at it? Will it see that as a capability and as an investment for long term? What are the future profit windfall opportunities? How can shareholders get convinced that if they are patient about it, they are willing to take the risk about it, this will happen? This is again a leadership agenda. Establishing the necessity for future market leadership and benefits to shareholders. Now, this point is very important, that if I am not a market leader today, it is a great ambition for me to become the market leader. What are the benefits that leadership position going to bring to the shareholders in the long term? That measurement, and they are intelligent people because they are putting their money and big skin into the game, so they understand whether it is real or not real. But of course there is a risk. It is never black and white. And then what is the current scaling up investment appetite? That should be established, communicated, even embraced by the shareholders, like 80-20, 70-30, 60-40 ratios, based on scaling up investment should be clearly defined. So at early stages, it would be like 80-20. So I'm investing more into the present and less into the future thing. But as I become successful market leader, grow my base, become a strong organization, have a good feel of my market and consumers and competition, then I should be moving to 70-30, 60-40. And then there should be, this progressive improvement of future scaling up costs. That should be the journey, and investment results should show positive returns to the shareholders. Now, this is a story that needs to be built to the shareholders. Will they accept it or not? It all depends on how well the history is supporting your story and how well you are able to project the future to them. Like the point that you made in the beginning, Dr. Suparna, is about R&D or innovations. Why would a shareholder invest in R&D when they know the chances of success are 10%, 20%? But if you can project to them that what is possible with this investment and the patience, that you have to wait for 5 years for this R&D to fructify, and the chances of fructification are 20%. But if it happens, what are the chances? Second, And if it happens, what actually can happen to you, your wealth, your investment, and your future. So these are some of the things. My understanding is that shareholders, the board members of any company, they are interested in when you go with a proposal of future to them.
Mr. Lonikar, in fact, we come back to the original question. It's a problem of definition. So, is the employee cost a cost or a capability? Are you nurturing cost or are you nurturing capability? So, it seems that the story building that happens before the shareholder is a story where one has internal conviction. And then only one can use those communication touch points to convince the shareholder that this is the story in front of you, like the plot. This is how the plot will move because we have seen it happen. We have plotted it that way. So this one needs to be a one of conviction. And when you say the risk appetite of organizations, so probably organizations, a lot of organizations in this kind of a world should revisit, become intelligent by revisiting their strategic orientations. Every organization has a strategic orientation. But if they could have a matrix, which thankfully Dr. Pandey has talked about, you have talked about, Dr. Mishra has indicated that if there is an etched map, so perhaps one can sort of decide on risk appetites, and it wouldn't be left to just researchers to take certain organizations and samples to see that how risk appetite works. Perhaps there should be a far more, I don't know if one should mix human and algorithmic decision making here or not. So that's a larger question we can take in the once we complete the round.
If I may, add, just look at the story of every business comes from a promoter, okay, and then it becomes a big business, and then it goes public and all those things. But look at the stories of the promoter stepping back and handing over the management of the business to a professional management, and not to the CEO who is an investor. Okay, when do they get that confidence? And that actually is the point, where rubber meets the road, that now I can sit away from the business, keep an eye on it. I may be like chairman emeritus for the business, but now my board is not under my control, my management is not on my control, but my investment continues to be in this business. That confidence, when the promoter gets and the promoting team gets at that point in time, shareholders always will have greater confidence in that management and that business, and getting more and more investments from them becomes much easier. Of course, a success footprint has to be created on a day-to-day basis. It's not a given thing.
Creating a success story. I think this is a very important thing, and working on that template. We come to a big, I think we were talking about internal capability. Motor confidence will be drawn from internal communication, internal vertical learning, internal confidence that is generated, and therefore you can write the story. What does it mean from a talent standpoint, Dr. Mishra?
I was really wondering where my turn would come, and I was just a fly on the wall. So I was actually going to leave in a short while because I said it's pointless. But nonetheless, I think as far as talent is concerned, let's understand the background of where we are in the landscape. Today, we're talking of where we can actually digitally put in intelligence in people to be able to understand how they're going to perform. So that's going to be really the future of, such is going to be the future of technology. But looking at the talent fabric, let's also understand there are two kinds of people, or rather three kinds of people who are coming into the organization. And remember, the organization immaterial of, look, I've worked across technology, very, very large, handled 300,000 people, worked all over the world. So it really depends. But honestly, if you look at it, there is, one is you have the high potential talent. But the high potential talent is not necessarily the kind of people or population that you're looking at. You also look at the critical resources who make the organization and make the organization function. And then, of course, you have the average performers and not such great performers. All of this needs a different kind of treatment. While we invest a lot of time and energy in trying to look at succession plans and doing development centers. But let's also understand that also has changed. Today, organizations are saying that, can I invest in talent to be able to do better or to have better capability within the organization, rather than sending them to some smart MBA college, because that's not going to give me any value. So it's basically return on investment for the organization. As far as the, I just feel that the learning and development, or the development of the organization, is dependent on the kind of leadership that stitch the people fabric into the culture of the organization. Are you therefore developing a learning organization which is agile, which promotes liquid workforce, which promotes being able to get change and understand change, and therefore are you able to reskill, multi-skill, and also to understand what is going to be the future of your business altogether. So if you look at it, even if you look at the development centers, and I'm giving only a small example. Today, for instance, you have, the DISCO, the digital mechanism of doing development centers, so where, when I say DISCO, I mean, something which is really short and fast, where you have rapid fire questions coming in and people just keep answering them, and, assessment centers done. Unlike the traditional assessment development centers, where we said, okay, this is the set of competencies that is required, this is the kind of people that are required, and are they really, and then you have people who come into, senior people who understand the kind of necessary competencies and the need of the organization, and therefore move them to that organization, whether they fill the set of competencies. So if you look at the talent matrix, it's like water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. So you have a huge landscape where you have a lot of people, but when you go out to the market and look for the kind of talent that you want for the organization, you really don't find them. And if you find them, you're asking for a premium. They ask for a premium. So what I'm trying to say is that there are many themes within this talent piece. One is you're getting the right kind of talent in, and whether the talent is performing or not. Then ensuring that through your different matrices that you have, whether it's a performance cycle or a talent development, or your learning and development, or any kind of schools or assessments that you're doing in-house, to see that they're moving up. And the movement is just not necessarily upwards, it's also laterally. So we have to, what we do is usually we move, people like to move up, but let's also understand that it gets complex as you move sideways also. So one has to understand that. And if you have, the organization has to move forward, then you need different themes. So it's one size doesn't fit all. As I said, all of us as in organizations are in a different kind of growth trajectory, and so therefore one has to be very careful in trying to get what is the right kind of matrices to measure, and therefore as leadership, how are we involved in developing the talent to move to the next step?
I have to ask you a question, because what you said is so inspiring. I know major public sector organizations are extremely worried about talent competencies. They have a very good mechanism of putting competencies in place. But in order to write a growth story, often, there are public-private partnerships, and they seem to inhabit two different horizons altogether. So is there a suggestion for, how do we rewrite, sort of looking at the critical resources? How you started out by saying high potential talent, but you mentioned many other levers as well that the organizations must constantly press on and keep in balance. So I constantly think, having worked with many public sector organizations as well as private sector ones, that often I find that all the focus is great, but these are two different horizons altogether. Would you like to add a line or two on how to bridge the gap?
Look, I was the head of HR for State Bank of India Life Insurance, which was an assimilation of bank probationary officers, of people from BNP Paribas, from Cardiff, and for people like us. Obviously, the treatment had to be different because they come from different culture and mindsets. So while you are handling talent, let's understand it's people. So therefore, it is essential to understand. For instance, SBI officers, as you know, that they had this golden handshake, but they went into the having proper development centers when they would have promotions and they defined the competencies and they did it at probably the kind of finesse that probably a lot of even private sectors wouldn't. So while the process is the same, but the overall way or methodology or the treatment of doing it was different. Also, let's understand, why did I say the disco kind of thing, which is typically, now I don't want to say, but you have many who are there out there. For instance, I'll give you an example. Like you have Jombe, which does a quick set of questions to be able to say, okay, these are your competent people and not such. And then you have your traditional SHL, DDI, who who will look at each of those competencies and then move ahead with those. But it stops there. And then you have the smaller ones, which is the boutique ones like a Basil Tree, where they're looking at, say, how do I get a return on investment? And as a company, we would really go to saying that how do you cross that, because your weakest link defines how your organization is going to move forward. Because your fast ones will always be fast-paced, and then they will also leave. Let's also understand that. So it is basically your critical resources and the ones who are not such, are probably in that, that spot which will make the difference. How do you nudge that talent is really essential.
Can't hear you.
So much. Please give us your wisdom. What does it mean from a talent standpoint? I think we have gained huge ground, but we need to enrich ourselves further in this question. Mr. Nanda. I am not able to hear you, Mr. Nanda. You're not audible, Mr. Nanda. Okay. Should I? Is there? Mr. Nanda doesn't seem to be able to hear me. So is there anyone? Dr. Pandey, would you like to add to this question also? I think this is a very important one. Let me try Mr. Nanda once again. Yeah, Dr. Pandey, please go ahead.
See, from a talent perspective, a few things become very critical during scale up. So one is access to right talent, right? And like Dr. Mishra said, water better everywhere, not a drop to drink. If you realize the number of engineering colleges that we have, the number of graduation colleges that we have, but actually hireable talent, people who can come and create value, who are ready for industry is still very less. Okay? I'll give an example of IT industry. So during COVID and post-COVID, suddenly there was a huge demand for IT talent. And in last 1 year, I can see easily the cost of hiring IT talent has gone up by almost 100%. To the extent that companies are willing to hire 2.5x of the price and hire people. Now that becomes a big challenge in a country like India, where a lot of startups need same kind of talent. So everyone is looking for AI, everyone is looking for ML, but you have very limited talent. So while as a country we have grown very fast, we have large pool of talent, we have acutely high number of engineers, we still have not worked on building that ecosystem for that will help organizations to scale up. So that remains a challenge. Secondly, as you start bringing in talent in the organization, the ability to delegate becomes extremely limited. See, a lot of people, so we are taught a lot of things in our B schools or even in organizations. Nobody teaches us how to delegate. And as we grow up, ability to get right talent, delegate tasks to them, create right matrix for them becomes equally important. Right? Third is, if you want to attract the right talent, and at whatever stage you are you able to differentiate your employer brand? Now, most of the organizations in India, especially in IT sector right now, competing on only on basis of compensation. So if I want to hire, I'll offer you a higher compensation and you can come and join me. But how is my talent brand different from somebody else's? And till the time that doesn't happen, till the time companies don't invest in building culture, identifying what works well for them, what kind of people they want, they're only hiring for skills and not for culture. It essentially means as you are scaling up, your culture takes a backseat. Then somewhere while you're driving your car, you need to put brakes on it, come back, realign your culture, see if it's working or not, and then focus on next set of growth. So if you look at regular growth will never happen in a straight line. It will always happen in punctuated equilibrium, which means you reach a point, then there's a valley of death. You take some time, you stabilize internal systems processes, then you take your next leap, because every time you will need to realign internal processes, culture, see if the new set of people are aligning to it, and that process takes a lot of time. A lot of organizations have gone through that cycle, and as you keep growing to the next level of growth, getting that right set of talent to suit you becomes equally critical. These are some of my thoughts, Dr. Basu.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, therefore, we have taken great strides in IT, in the sector, but to what extent we have we are consulting partners is one big question. Now, becoming consulting partners is not dependent on compensation at all. So that requires employee brand, that requires workplace branding. So and it's a pathway to innovation, because if you don't have these critical talent resources, I don't think we have good design teams. And even in terms of Mr. Lonikar, I think we won't be able to write better stories if we don't have better design teams. And it's absolutely a collaborative effort. It is not just promoter driven, but rather leadership driven. I think, but there's one question
But
which I would like.
again, Siparna, I'd like to say that a lot of it is the pull and push mechanism. So let's also understand that today, what does a person want to be? During our times, there was a limited choice that we had. Today, even if you are going to put in, say, because of work from home, you have so many online portals which people want, but it's really about how many of them are actually accessing that, right? So it's a pull and push mechanism in terms of what is it that the organization through its culture and leadership trying to push, and you as an employee are wanting to move forward to make that move or to make that learn. So somewhere let's understand that there is a larger framework, which is that's why I said the fabric of the organization is extremely important, and the leadership as well. So if the leadership is kind of showing that kind of, for instance, I work with Accenture. So, you ensured that, you had to have 100% compliance on particular modules, say like, for instance, data security, right? But that is probably not something which is evident in a lot of other organizations. So you had to have certain modules which were essential for the organization. So that was a push and pull mechanism. So apart from that, you could have different storyboards that you took care of, or you wanted to read, and therefore scale up. And therefore, when you had a larger vacancy or position that came up, you applied and you moved up. So there are a lot of things which are there in the environment which are probably not spoken about, but which make what the learning organization or the agile organizations.
There are two things. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment, but maybe we'll try if Nanda has now access. When after that, if time permits, I would like to say something.
Absolutely. I was going to come to actually Mr. Lonikar and then to Mr. Nanda. Do you think that it makes much more sense in the Indian context to have kind of operating models which are asset light, because we talked about resources, constraint, risk appetite, Do you think it's makes much more sense, because startups definitely need that kind of models, that we should have more asset light operating models? So should we have like 2 minutes, everyone? Mr. Nanda, would you like to start with that? Do we need asset light models?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of the audio in between. And
I do
apologies
get
for
it.
that. Yeah, but I think it's probably the way I would look at it is if the asset light model is something that is sustainable, scalable, and it also protects the IP of the organization without getting diluting on that. I think it's clearly something that we should clearly look at. But I think the larger issue is that most organizations, when they look at asset light, they actually tend to shirk away their responsibilities and hand it over to somebody else to manage. If that is the purpose, I think then it really does not meet the overall objective. I think as long as, even if the service or the activity is being provided by somebody else who's invested on your behalf, I think operating that organization or operating that in that ecosystem with all the values and beliefs that you expect to be followed is equally important. Whereas if it is only done from the point of view of making sure that you can variabilize as much of your cost as possible, and then reduces your exit cost whenever you have to exit. If that is the purpose for doing it, it just serves a short-term purpose, but really never a long-term in terms of building an organization for the future. I mean, that's the way I would look at it. At least that's been my experience. But of course, a large part of my experience has been in traditional manufacturing-oriented organizations. So therefore, our orientation will be very different from some of the new age companies that have come into services in other industries, which may have a very different orientation about it.
I think that's it. I didn't think about it. Absolutely.
Well,
I was just looking at the positive aspect. Mr. Lonika.
Technology company, sorry, Suparna.
Yeah. Dr. Usha,
if you were a technology company like, say, Infosys, your asset would probably, and your balance sheet would really be the people. You see, so it depends what organization, like Mr. Nanda said. So for most companies which are not really very heavily into manufacturing, the assets are really the people. Everything else you can buy, you can have the best of technologies, you can value it. But what makes the difference is the people asset, and that's why human resources professionals play such an important role and are part of the C-suites and are therefore taking on even CEO roles today.
I am completely on the same page with you. I always thought HR builds brand rather than the marketing building brand. I completely on the same page with you. Couldn't agree more. Thanks for coming in very strong on that issue, Mr. Lonikar.
Yeah, I must begin by complimenting Tanaya. It's so inspiring to see your passion about talent and HR, and that is so real. I wish we have more HR professionals and business leaders who think and talk like that. But when it comes to the growth of the business, scaling up as a topic that we are discussing, if the scaling up benefits are not going to the shareholders or investors, there is something that will instantly happen. If the scaling up benefits are not reaching to the employees, something may not happen in the present. And that is where I think all of us as leaders, HR, have a responsibility. I hear this statement very often from many people, ordinary people performing extraordinarily. I feel very sad as a HR professional because I have not met any ordinary person in my life. There are unique people. Everybody is gifted, and we have to believe that everybody has a potential, and like you, everybody aspires to grow. And if these two things can be put to use, then everybody in the organization is an asset. Then of course we have to do differentiation, like Tanaya was talking about high potential and valued contributor. That is, as a part of the system, you have to distribute and differentiate appropriately as a business decision. But nobody is insignificant. Nobody is ignorable. And those are insignificant and ignorable for your business. They are not part of your business. So Whether it is outsourced company or whether it is on-rolls employees, everybody is contributing to your business and you must take care of these people. And during this corona, this fact came to the fore that it doesn't see if you are a CEO, you will not get infected, and if you are a contractor's employee, you will get immediately infected. It doesn't happen like that. Life is like that, right? And business has to learn from life a little bit. And we have to further this point that the gain sharing of the success of the growth must happen like it happens to the investors. In end of the quarter, you give dividends to them and you want employees to wait for 3 years to see sustainable growth of the business is not a fair policy, you know. And the employees are punished instantly when the performance is below the budget. But when it goes 150% time, they are not rewarded 150% times. You know, so this is where the dilemma is in terms of the philosophy of decision makers. And the only point that I'm trying to make, sorry for a long comment, is if the business is gaining because of the growth, the gains must be shared with the employees with generosity and fairness. That's the only point I would. Thank you.
It's a fantastic way of tying the human situation as we are going now, because it certainly does not make a distinction between who is the CEO and who is the manager or the employee. It does not. And sharing gain, sharing success generously. I think you overwhelmingly talk about empathy. Probably an empathetic organization. It builds a better workplace brand. Has a better workplace brand any day. It's an empathy, because we are all also working in technology silos. We are meeting virtually, but it's not the same. I don't know to what extent we can build social capital. I definitely want to keep in touch with you. And having said that, it would be so much nicer to be able to meet. So we are probably spending on social capital rather than building on social capital. And for an organization, it's not easy. So to what extent we show, it shows generosity, that nobody is insignificant because you're part of the system. And there is a reason why I brought you in. Have I given enough opportunities for you to be part of the system more? So before we decide whether you're capable, incapable, have the organization also given a lot of opportunities to be part of the system? Dr. Pandey, your valuable insights, asset light. Well, there's nothing called light or nothing called so-called assets, but there are other dangerous sides to it because you can shove responsibilities. Mr. Nanda has said, coming from manufacturing, I didn't look at that end at all, but it's a reality. So what are your comments? Dr. Pandey, you're on mute probably. There is a, yeah.
Sorry, my fault.
Yeah.
Okay, I think firstly, absolutely amazing insights from Dr. Mishra, Mr. Nanda, and Mr. Lonikar. I think really, really amazing. I think asset light model is going to be the future. May not be in manufacturing so much, but towards IT side, towards services side, the gig economy is the future. See, a lot of people today, so in our generation before that, being financially stable was very critical. In this generation, they already have access to basic minimum requirements of life. They can make enough money by working for a few hours a day. And a lot of people now are shifting to the gig economy where they believe that why should I work 12 hours a day or 14 hours a day? I can easily find work for 6 hours a day. That suits purpose of the organization as well, who may not want to have full-time resources as well. We see models like WeWork, which may not have been very successful in past, but in future you will get such models where you can have shared space, where you can have basic infra to work. Companies would come, companies would be formed for a limited period of time, they will achieve their goals, they'll disintegrate, and these people may be working with 4 or 5 different organizations at the same time. That's possible. So asset light model is going to be there. It is not a question of if, it's a question of when, and that is future, how I look at it. Sorry.
I was also thinking of this may be a good way of improving diversity and inclusion, because we can bring a lot of women professionals who had to withdraw from the workforce for several challenges of home and other challenges. They can come back to work in this kind of a model, and they may choose to work again with multiple organizations and share their talent, which I think workplaces are beginning to focus on. but it can happen big time, bring back women into the workforce. God knows we need that very badly. It's been an amazing discussion, and I'm just going to go to the chat, and maybe coordinators can help me a little bit also. If we see any questions and answers, definitely I'd like to throw open the forum for any questions and answers if there are. So participants, kindly put in any questions if you wish to, and that can be taken by any one of our panelists.
So while we're looking for the questions, Sriparna, I completely agree with you, Amit, on the fact that gig economy is the future. Even within organizations, liquid workforce is something which is working. What that means is projects open up, people come in, finish whatever it is that they want as part of job enlargement, job enrichment, and they move back. Organizations today are also agile, so therefore, they don't want to have too many resources that come in, and sharing of bench or where it could be shared between two mothers or people who want to work part time. This was always there in the BPO industry. Any of you have been part of the BPO. But now gig is like you said is the way, and that's really what is happening, because people want to, this kind of generation and the culture is very different, and we have to understand that people who are coming in are very different. They want to do different things, and they don't really necessarily want to be stuck to a job. So yeah,
priorities are very different. I see that in my students, because I often ask them the kind of life questions they answer to, the kind of persona they are. They are very different in terms of aspirations from what we used to be. None of them, for instance, want to buy cars, which they see as a kind of a responsibility. Nor do they want to buy homes. So it's very interesting in terms of, but yes, they're increasingly looking at workplace branding. So that I understand, and they want to research their employers far more. As a questionnaire also, I put it to what, in terms of, when it comes to hiring, what are the things that you're looking at? They kind of ticked all the boxes, that not just the website. I want to look at the recruiter. I want to look at if the recruiters have written anything, blogs, research papers, anything. I want to look at everything that they have done. So watch out, dear panelists. So they want to look at everything before facing them, and they want to understand the discourse. They want to understand how the organization is placed vis-a-vis the employees, the market, and therefore take a decision. So I think in terms of aspiration, things have changed. It's more agile models we are moving forward to. And I'm so glad that I took copious notes, because these are opportunities for me to take back to class. Of course, I will be attributing privileged to have been the kind of intermediary to facilitate the discussion today. And my utmost thanks for joining in this discussion. Thank you so much. I have gained a lot.
Thank you so much, Professor Basu. It was really wonderful. Such a knowledgeable session that you people have provided. Every panelist have come up with a word of wisdom that is really going to give us a new horizon to fly in this particular subject. And hats off to you, Professor Basu. You have taken it really nicely, conducted really well.
So I was ready to learn.
Of course, we can do a clap for ma'am.
Thank you so much. Hope to meet you in person.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Shilpa. Thank you, Tarina.